All right. My clock says it's a minute or two after 7 o'clock, so we're going to get started with the Q&A with MSBA session regarding the upcoming superintendent search in Tri-City United Public Schools. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. We really appreciate it. I did want to let everyone know that this is being recorded, and we are going to have a link to this session on the district website tomorrow or the next day. So for anyone who couldn't attend tonight, but is looking for information on the superintendent search, they will be able to watch it there on the district website as well. Again, welcome. My name is Barb Doran. I'm the Director of Leadership Development and Executive Search at MSBA. I work exclusively in the areas of superintendent search and superintendent evaluation. And tonight the focus will be on the superintendent search for Tri-City United. Also with me tonight is Jamison Silman. Jamison is our technology guru. So if you have any challenges with technology during the session, please look in the chat box. JJ will put his email address in there. So if anything isn't going appropriately on your end and you just can't hear or see anything, please reach out to JJ and he'll be able to help you. JJ will also be sharing some screen sharing some documents for me this evening as we review some of the things that are in place for the TCU search. And I really appreciate him being with us. So thank you so much, JJ, for being here. I'm going to give you a real quick overview of what we're going to be discussing tonight. I do want to let you know, first of all, that we're going to be very respectful of your time, and we will be concluded by 8 o'clock at the latest. It could be much shorter than that, but I want to make sure that we've allowed enough time to answer all of your questions about the search process and what to expect over the next few months as the TCU board searches for its next superintendent. Also, you've noticed that you are muted, and that is on purpose because we want you to this evening place your questions into the chat box. If there's anything that you'd like to know about the search process, JJ will be monitoring the chat box and sharing with me your questions. Also, doing it that way ensures your anonymity so that you can feel free to ask any and all questions without anybody knowing who is asking what. And similarly, the questions that were submitted in advance were submitted anonymously. So please feel free to ask anything that you would like to know about the search process. Some of the questions we may paraphrase if there is overlap or duplication, but we will get to everything that you would like to ask this evening. Finally, the questions should be around the search process, of course, and we won't be able to share any questions that are inappropriate, for example, or contain profanity. But I do want to make sure that you feel the process is transparent and available and open to stakeholders. And on behalf of the board, I want to thank you for your interest in being with us tonight to learn some more about the upcoming search process in your district. So really, there's going to be two parts we're going to cover in terms of the search tonight. There are two portions. The first portion, I'm going to provide a general overview of superintendent search processes, things that are typically done during a search, and answer some questions about the search process overall. I'm also going to then share some specifics about the TCU search around the timeline that we're expecting to follow, the vacancy brochure, and the stakeholder input and the survey. So we'll be doing that first, and then the second part of this evening's session is to answer all of the questions. I did receive questions in advance. Thank you to anyone who submitted those. I'll address those and also, again, take any and all questions that you might have for us this evening. Feel free to type questions in the box at any time. If it is tied to something I'm talking about at the moment, such as the timeline or the brochure, I've told JJ to please interrupt me and make sure that I'm addressing it as we go along so that it feels like a give and take in terms of questions and answers for you tonight. All right, so with that, I'm going to simply dive right in and talk a bit about superintendent searches in general. What we like to tell school boards and districts is that superintendent search is really both an art and a science. All right, it's two pieces, and the first piece is the art. Now, the art of a search comes into play in terms of really knowing your district well, determining the leadership profile of the kind of person who would best lead your district moving forward. Also, the hiring criteria to understand what you're looking for in terms of skills and experience and background. It's also an art to really think about marketing the position and providing the opportunity in such a way that piques the interest of potential applicants to throw their hat into the ring. Also, I think screening and vetting the applications is an art. There's a lot of subtleties to that, to determining what sort of person, again, will match the hiring criteria for the district, and listening very carefully to the answers that candidates give during the interview process for the position of superintendent. So those are the nuances that are a part of the search, and it's a really important part of the search. Also, however, very important is what we call the science side of the search, and that hinges primarily on two Minnesota state statutes, the Open Meeting Law and the Data Practices Act. Both of them apply to superintendent searches, and it can at times feel like a balancing act between the two. For example, every single step of the superintendent search process must adhere to open meeting guidelines. So all facets of the search will be conducted in an open session by the school board. The school board will not be closing any meetings for the superintendent search, and that includes deliberating as to who they want to name as finalists and bring in to be interviewed. It includes the interviews themselves, and it includes the deliberations after the interviews about which candidate they would like to make an offer to. All of those meetings must be conducted in an open session. Now, the flip side of that is the Data Practices Act, which revolves around data privacy, which is also an extremely important part of a superintendent search. For example, all of the applicant names, every single applicant that throws their hat into the ring of this position, the board will know who those folks are. As the hiring authority, they are able to review that information, and they cannot share it with anyone. That is confidential. Applicant names only become public by state statute when and if they are named to be interviewed by the school board for the position. So if someone is selected for an interview, they are then by statute defined as a finalist. And at that point, their names are made public. Everyone else who has applied for the position, their names remain private forever. And the board is going to have to be very careful to really be sure that they are balancing confidential information and data privacy with all of the requirements of the open meeting law. So that's the big picture of superintendent search, and two of the things that really come to fruition most often as far as some of the challenges that lie ahead for school boards conducting superintendent searches. I'm going to pause for just a moment. I know it's early, but JJ, are there any questions in the chat box that I should know about yet?
There are none.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so now I want to talk specifically about some things relative to the TCU search. So JJ, if you would please screen share the timeline, first of all, for Tri-City United. We're going to take a look at that. All right, thank you. So the first thing I want to have you look at here is the second line, October 29th through November 12th. That says that is when the stakeholder online survey is open. So it's been open for a couple of weeks now, and it will remain open through November 12th, which is Friday, correct? So the deadline is coming up, but through the stakeholder survey, the board wants input from stakeholders across the district. We're going to talk more specifically about the survey in a moment, but just so you're aware that the survey is still open, and we are hoping for as much participation as we can get from district stakeholders. Tonight, November 9th, is the virtual Q&A session, again, the recording of which will be made available on the website for folks who want answers about the search. On November 22nd, the school board is slated to approve the final vacancy brochure, which we'll show you in a minute, along with the hiring criteria that goes in that brochure. You'll see there's a bit of a gap between November 12th, when the survey closes, and November 22nd, when the board takes a look at the summary of the stakeholder feedback and approves the final brochure. The reason for that is during that period, MSBA is going to be going through all of the stakeholder input and determining what the stakeholders are saying that aligns or doesn't align with what the board has already determined they're looking for in their next leader. So we will come back to the school board at that meeting with recommendations based upon the stakeholder input specific to the brochure. All right, we'll then post it shortly thereafter on November 24th. It will be posted in a lot of different places. The primary places tend to be on MSBA's website, We get about 4,000 to 5,000 hits per month during search season for folks looking for superintendent opportunities in Minnesota. Also MASA, the Superintendent's Association website, EdPost through St. Cloud State University, and Rebellis, which is a proprietary nationwide database that school board associations who conduct searches also put all of the positions on. So November 24th, right before Thanksgiving, this position will go live and applicants can begin filling out the information and submitting materials they need to in order to be considered for the position of superintendent of TCU. On January 5th at midnight, that will close. So the position will be posted from November 24th to January 5th. And at January 5th at midnight, no one else will be able to apply for the position. And we will be sending out regular reminders that the position is closing soon. And we have a database of all kinds of folks in MSBA's database who are currently superintendents, assistant superintendents, principals, assistant principals, charter school directors, service co-op directors, and so on and so forth. So we cast as wide a net as we can to get folks' applications in before January 5th. The board members, again, will review all of the applications. They have access to that as a hiring authority. Those names remain private, and we'll do some training with the board to ensure that they're not violating any data practices law when they are reviewing and then when they are discussing those applications. They will discuss the applications here on January 24th. In an open session. I always have to remind folks of that. And because it's in an open session, but they're bound by data practices law, they are going to be discussing the applications only as candidate A, B, C, etc. They will not and cannot use any names to discuss the applications they've received. And they can also not give out any identifying information about those applicants. For example, when they're talking about candidate A, they cannot say, well, you know, I really thought it was great when they were principal of this certain district for 4 years, because anyone with Google could probably start to figure out who was a principal in that district for 4 years. So the school board, again, is going to be very careful in the comments they offer on January 24th, but they will have seen the applications and know who they are speaking about. MSBA will also recommend the applicants that we feel are strongest and that align best with the district's hiring criteria, but ultimately it is the board's call. They will, at the conclusion of that meeting, make a motion to interview candidates B, F, H, M, and N, or something like that. When that motion passes, then at that point, and only at that point, the names of the finalists will be read aloud. So at the conclusion of the January 24th meeting, the names of the finalists, it's typically 6 folks that get interviewed, but it could be more, it could be less. Those names are announced the evening of January 24th. You'll then see the board is conducting interviews on the 26th and the 28th. These are usually 1-hour interviews with a slight break in between. So we recommend 2 days. So it's 3 or 4 hours of interviews on one day, 3 or 4 hours the next day, along with the deliberations of who to send on to the second round, which is slated to occur on January 31st. Usually there are 3 candidates interviewed in the second round, not always. That will be up to the board. And those interviews are also open to the public. At the end of that meeting on January 31st, after the last interview, the board will deliberate and select a lone finalist. That lone finalist will then be contacted that night, given the decision of the board, and asked if they would like to proceed with contract negotiations. So at that point, it is up to the board to negotiate a successful contract with the superintendent. And if all goes well, they should approve the contract in mid-February, and the superintendent would begin working the district on July 1st. That's an overview of the timeline. Now, please keep in mind that the entire timeline is on the district's website. They're doing a great job of keeping things updated there. And I would encourage you, if you want to go on there and download the timeline to make sure that you know when things are happening, you are certainly free to do so. JJ, are there any questions in the chat about the timeline at all?
None at this time.
Okay, thank you. Next, if you would please share the draft vacancy brochure. Now, keep in mind, everyone, this is a draft. This will be finalized by the board on November 22nd before we post it on all of those sites that I mentioned. But this is an opportunity for the district to really share what's exciting about the opportunity and to differentiate yourself from other searches which might be occurring. On the left side of the brochure, you'll see that there are points of pride. So those are things that really make the district special. What would you like to brag about in terms of the district, and then also about the communities that make up the Tri-City area? So those things are a work in progress still, but those are the things that will pique someone's interest enough to want to dig deeper. Now, when people are looking for a position as a superintendent, it's kind of a small world, especially within the state of Minnesota. And so this is one piece of a much larger puzzle. Candidates will, of course, look at this. They'll look for the things that you are proud of in your district. They'll look at the timeline. They'll look at the criteria. They'll look at the salary range, et cetera. But what they're really going to do is dig deeper. They'll go to MDE's website. They will go to the district's website. They will talk to people. And there are primarily three things. We get asked a lot, why would someone look at an opportunity in any particular district across the state? The three things that I think they're looking for the most are location. And the location for the TCU opportunity is phenomenal. Location is a big driver of interest. Also, the salary that they're offering, and that is something that you want to be real upfront with and at least provide a number so they have some context about what they're looking for. And then the last thing that they always look for when deciding is the reputation of the district. What are the history of board relationships between superintendent and board members, staff and board? So those sorts of things are really important to folks. And again, this brochure is just one piece of that much larger puzzle to get folks applying for the position. On the second page of the brochure, on the top, you'll see it talks about a leadership profile. All of the to be determines are going to come from the board's survey. We've surveyed them as to what hiring criteria matters most to them, and from that stakeholder survey. A lot of what the stakeholders are being asked mirrors what we've already talked to the board about. So during that gap between the closing of the survey and the board approving this brochure, we're going to be looking for alignment between what the stakeholders feel is important and what the board feels is important. Now, as I fill this in, I'm going to be looking at both of those resources of information, trying to craft a leadership profile which reflects all the folks in the district, including, of course, the school board themselves. In here, we have a base salary of the current superintendent to give folks some context. There's financials of the districts being offered, as well as the screening team information and my contact information. So this again is the vacancy brochure. It is not final yet, so it is not on the website. It will be on the website on November 24th when we send out emails to our databases about the position, post them on all of the other sites, and again, it will also be posted on the district website. So that is the vacancy brochure. And I want to see if there's any questions about that in particular yet.
There is none at this time.
All right, thank you, JJ. If you could also now open up the stakeholder survey. I want to very briefly go through the survey. I'm going to assume many of the folks on tonight have probably already filled out the survey. If anyone has not, encourage you again to please do so before midnight on Friday night to ensure that we are able to get all of your voices in this survey process. Now, when you look at the survey he's going to pull up, you're going to notice a couple of things. One is that the first thing we're doing is we're going to be asking you to self-identify who you are. All right. So all of you wear many hats. I am sure that you are potentially a parent, a community member, a staff member. So when you fill out the survey, we would ask you to please self-identify here on the first part. Which hat are you wearing when you fill this out? So that we have a sense of what different groups of stakeholders responded to the survey. We really do want a cross-section of folks responding to the survey. Now, also the next question, you'll see it says choose the top 6. This is one of several quantitative questions where we ask you to try to prioritize a number of things. The first question is about the areas of expertise. I do have to clarify right away that every single one of these things are important. That's one of the things we hear a lot, that, well, all of these are important, and I would completely agree with you. What we need to do, though, is to winnow this down so that the priorities that bubble to the top for your district are the ones that we include in the information we share with potential applicants. All right, so that's really important. The next phase is the top 6 traits or skills. These are a little bit longer sentences, verbiage about the backgrounds of folks. And again, every one of these matter. It would be ideal to find a candidate who's absolutely perfect in absolutely everything that involves a superintendent's responsibilities. It just is not always realistic. So please help us determine what skills, traits, and background are most important to you when you fill out this survey. The next thing that you'll notice on the survey is a very simple yes/no question. All right. It is important that the next superintendent have previous experience as a superintendent, yes or no. We've also asked the board this question. And so we're going to compare what the stakeholders feel along with what the school board feels. And we'll look for that alignment and we'll word the brochure accordingly. There's another quantitative question about the top 6 characteristics, all important, but we want to make sure that we're taking the temperature of the community and the stakeholders to find out what sort of person would best lead this district moving forward. Then we're going to move into some qualitative questions. These are open-ended questions that allow you the opportunity to share with us what are the good things happening right now in TCU Public Schools? What challenges are ahead? What might the new superintendent need to know about the history of the district and the community in order to be successful? And what other comments might you want to share? I want to point out that all responses to this survey are anonymous, so that you can please be candid in your responses, and there are no character limits on any of the open-ended questions as well. Now, when we see this after it's closed on Friday, we will take all of the responses and we will start to identify the trends, because there will be things that will rise to the top in the comments in all of these open-ended questions. And we'll share those trends and those some representative quotes with the school board so that they know what the stakeholders think, said, and felt. So please do your best to share with us your true feelings about each of these scenarios, and we will be sure to pass those along to the school board for their consideration. So that's the conclusion of the survey. Now it's online, and I do want to acknowledge that not everyone has access to a computer, nor do they necessarily want to use a computer or are able to use a computer. So there are hard copies of the survey at the district office. So if you know of folks that don't want to use a computer to do this, please direct them to the district office. The survey is available in both English and in Spanish, and they can fill out surveys there or online, whichever best fits what they're interested in doing. So that's the stakeholder survey. And I will say that we typically see for a district of your size with the number of students that are enrolled at TCU, we would expect about 200 responses, a little over 200 perhaps. And currently, I just checked the results of the survey before this session. Currently, there are 130 responses to the survey at TCU. Now, we will work with the district to send a reminder out later this week to ensure people know it's closing Friday at midnight, and we'll see another bump. We always see bumps at the conclusion of the survey. But at this time, we are sitting at 130 stakeholders who have filled out the survey for TCU. All right. Thank you for sharing that, JJ. Are there any questions in the chat box at this point?
There are none at this time.
Okay. All right. So now what I'm going to do, the second half of the session, as I mentioned, we are going to move from sort of an overview of superintendent searches and specifics about the TCU search to the questions that were sent in advance and or any other questions that you would like to ask before we wrap up this evening. We did get some questions in advance. Thank you to anyone who submitted those. We appreciate it. And I'm going to do my best to answer everything that was asked. Now, the first 3 questions that were asked actually were questions that would be asked of the candidates themselves. So the questions tonight that I'm going to answer are about the process and about expectations of what's going to happen during the search process. I will say, though, that the questions that you've submitted that were relative to the superintendent candidates, they touched on things such as employee retention, keeping good employees in the district, also the music and the arts at TCU, and also a question around the activities and coaching area. I do want to let you know that the school board will be crafting interview questions, both round 1 and round 2, that very often align with the concerns that folks have raised, such as that. Now, when we do interview training, we have sample, I think it's 170 questions for interviews that they could certainly take a look at. Very often they use some of those. They pick and choose questions that fit the district. And we often craft questions specific to TCU and the issues facing you. So all of those things will be brought into play, and all of the feedback provided in the stakeholder survey will be used not only to craft that brochure that I already showed you, but also to help create interview questions. The things that have bubbled to the top for stakeholders will be included in the questions, because we want to use the hiring criteria and the stakeholder feedback as sort of a yardstick. That's against which we're going to measure the candidates to see if they are a good fit for your district. So ensuring that those kinds of questions get asked of the applicants is really important. And I want to thank you for submitting them. The board will definitely be spending a great deal of time at the interview training session, choosing the questions that they would like to ask of the question or of the candidates, pardon me. Then there was a question about superintendent contracts. There was a question that asked, in terms of superintendent contracts, what kinds of things are applicable in a superintendent contract? What sorts of consequences are there in contracts for a superintendent who might leave a contract early, or a board that lets a superintendent out of their contract early, those sorts of things. All I can tell you is that superintendent contracts vary significantly from district to district. Very often there's a superintendent contract in place, which the district has used successfully for many years. And then what they'll do is they'll hold up their current contract to the MSBA, MASA. We partnered on a model contract, and they'll compare their current contract to the model contract, which we recommend, and make slight changes based upon that. But whether or not there are consequences in a contract for being released early, that's completely and utterly up to the school board, and in negotiations with their selected candidate, that is also an item that's up for negotiations. There's not a standard template or standard requirements for superintendent contracts along those lines. I will tell you, though, that contracts, according to Minnesota statute, can now be no longer than 3 years. That is the longest length of a superintendent contract that any district across the state is able to negotiate. So as a result, most contracts in the state of Minnesota are 1, 2, or 3 years long. Okay, so you cannot have a long-term contract, and you do have the opportunity every time a contract expires to negotiate a new contract, even if it's with the same superintendent. The contract terms can be different. They no longer roll over. They're no longer a successive contract that is simply the same. School boards have the opportunity, as do superintendents, to negotiate a new contract, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 years when their contract expires. So thank you for that question. Another question I got was regarding the position potentially being used as a stepping stone in the district. As we all know, with most things in life, stability is essential for long-term success. And so this person is wondering if there is a way to recruit a superintendent that will give us 7 to 10 years or more of stability at the TCU district. Well, this ties directly into the answer I just gave as far as length of contract. Because they cannot exceed 3 years, you cannot negotiate a long-term agreement with a superintendent. All right. And I think part of the reason that superintendent tenures are shorter across the state now than they used to be is due to that limiting factor of no contract more than 3 years. The average tenure right now for a superintendent in the state of Minnesota is about 5.2 years. I think the days of having a superintendent in a district for 10 or 20 years are becoming more rare. They do happen. It can happen. It is simply more rare because every 2 or 3 years, probably 3, a contract is being negotiated at each point. So that might contribute to some more turnover than there had been in the past. But I can also tell you that regardless of someone's intentions, when they apply for a job, they don't always stick to those intentions. For example, someone might share, we can't ask about it. You can't say, do you intend to stay here for 10 years or something? That you can't ask that, but someone might volunteer. I'm looking for a long-term opportunity. I'd love to stay in this district. I think it's a great fit. I'm excited. Now, their intentions might be that. However, in year 1, 2, or 3 of the contract, things might change. Maybe there are family circumstances for that new superintendent that change, that require a move. Or maybe there are issues within the district that were not present when they took the position. Or maybe there's been turnover on the board. So even though someone might intend to stay a long time, they may not because of all of those moving parts. Now, conversely, keep in mind that someone might say, probably wouldn't tell the board this, but I'm looking at this as a stepping stone. I want to build my resume. It's a great district. I'm going to strengthen all my opportunities on paper, and then I'm planning to move on after 3 years. They wouldn't tell anyone that, but that might be their intention. We have seen people that have said, this is probably going to be a short-term gig for me because I'm looking for something in a bigger district or up north or something. They sometimes stay much longer than they anticipated. All right, because it turns out it's a great fit. They love working there. It's an exciting environment to be in. Education is a priority for the communities. And so they sometimes plan to stay only those 2 or 3 years, and sometimes they stay longer. So it really depends. And I appreciate the question. And I know that it's it's of interest to folks to have a superintendent join the district that's planning on being there a while. I just want to make sure that we're all clear as to the reasons why that can't or doesn't always happen. All right, so also a great question. Thank you for asking it. Those were the questions that were submitted in advance. So I'm going to turn it over now to everyone who's watching tonight. If you'd like to put any questions in the chat box, now is your opportunity. So I'm going to stop talking just for a moment. I'll check with JJ and see if there's anything in there as of yet.
There are none at this time.
Okay, thank you. Please keep an eye on it and just let me know, interrupt me.
Will do.
I do want to just touch on a couple of questions that typically crop up because sometimes you may go home and go, oh, I wish I had asked about this. So I'm going to share with you a couple of questions that we have been asked at other districts when we do this Q&A session. Now, the first one people always ask is, will we know who's applied for the position? And I touched on that earlier when I talked about the Data Practices Act. So no, you will not know who has applied for the position until and if they are named as a finalist. And then yes, then you will know their names. But you will not know the names of the applicants that were not named as finalists. That is protected by the Data Practices Act. Another question that gets asked a lot is about whether candidates are internal or external. And there are a lot of folks across the state of Minnesota who have superintendent licenses because it's a requirement. You must have a Minnesota superintendent license in order to serve as a superintendent in Minnesota. Now, a lot of people have them, but there are only 332 public school districts in Minnesota. And I want to say, I think it's over 700 that actually have superintendent licenses. They're not actively using them, but they have them. So there may or may not be people within your district that have a license, and they may or may not be interested in the position to lead the district. I will tell you, though, that an internal and external candidate will be treated the same. There is absolutely no preferential treatment given to anyone who already works within Tri-City United School District. Everyone, because you are an EEOC employer, must go through the same process. Now, if there's an internal candidate, occasionally they're telling lots of people they've applied because they're excited about it. They love the district, they love working there. So they're telling people they've applied for the position. Keep in mind that school board members cannot comment on that. They will not be able to confirm or deny someone who says that they've applied. Or if it's an external candidate that people know that said, yeah, I'm applying for the position, board members can't comment on that because that name won't go public officially until they've named them as a finalist. But internal and external candidates will receive the same treatment and need to submit the same documentation, go through the same process as anyone who's an external candidate. We also get asked about residency. Can we require the new superintendent to live within the district? The answer is no, you cannot. Residency for superintendency in Minnesota is not a requirement. It's protected by state statute. It's not like first responders, where first responders need to live within a certain distance of the city center in order to be a firefighter or something like that. Superintendents do not need to live in the district, so we cannot ask about that. That is not a question that the board is going to be able to ask, or they will be in violation of statute. I'm going to stop for just a minute. Any questions yet, JJ?
There are none at this time.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, we're going to wrap up here fairly soon then. We've had your attention for about a half hour, so I don't want to keep you any longer. I do want to let you know that I would please ask you to check the district website on a regular basis. Again, they're doing a great job of getting the information out there. The timeline is on there. The survey links are on there for both Spanish and English surveys. The brochure will be on there once the brochure has been finalized by the board. So I really want to say that's a great way to keep apprised of the process. I also want to encourage you to come to the board meetings. Now, I'm not sure what the history of the board has been during the pandemic as far as live streaming goes, but one other question we get asked is, will interviews be live streamed? That is something that the board is going to discuss and decide upon. I will say, however, that if your district has been live streaming board meetings, they still meet the open meeting requirement by even if they don't live stream. So it's possible that interviews will be conducted sort of in the pre-pandemic way, which is in the open meeting, doors are open to that room, the board is conducting their business in the public, so the interviews may be conducted only in the public without live streaming. And I say that just to ensure that there's a level playing field. All right, if you do have 6 candidates If the latter candidates are able to watch the interviews of the first candidates, they have an unfair advantage because they will know what the questions are. Same questions will be asked of every single applicant that is being interviewed. So in order to ensure a level playing field, the board may or may not decide not to live stream, just to ensure that no one has an unfair advantage over any of the other candidates. And I think that just makes sense, but that has not yet been decided. So if there are no questions in the chat, one last chance, JJ.
There are none at this time.
Okay, thank you. Then we're going to wrap up and bring the session to a close. Thank you so much for being with us. I want to thank you for your interest in the superintendent search. Please look for this recording to be on the website within a day or two. And if anyone has questions about the search process, the board wanted to provide as much access and transparency on the search process as they could. And hopefully this recording will do that for folks who were not able to be with us this evening. So thank you very much for your interest in the TCU superintendent search. My name is Barb. I'm at MSBA. You can contact me with any additional questions at any time. We're honored to assist the district with the search and really look forward to working with the school board over the next few months. So thank you very much for coming and have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.